Is the OnePlus 3's camera good enough to beat the highly praised cameras of the LG G5 and Nexus 6P?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's find out. Hello everybody, I'm Krystal.
And I'm Dan.
And if you're wondering where the iPhone 6s Plus is and the Samsung Galaxy S7, we already did a camera comparison for them with the OnePlus 3 a couple days ago, so you can check that out in the description below or in that card up there.
And some people were wondering where we got this cool case for the OnePlus 3, and it's not actually a case, it's a skin from dBrand. And dBrand makes all different types of skins for different phones, different textures, different patterns, for really any phone, and even things like laptops.
Yeah, so if you want to check that out, link to dBrand below.
Let's begin.
Yes. So here's what you're going to notice throughout this camera comparison, is that all three phones take really great pictures in outdoors. I mean, what 2016 flagship doesn't? But you'll always notice darker photos with the Nexus 6P with a cooler color temperature. And you'll always notice a more cropped version of the picture with the LG G5 and sometimes very warm colors. And you'll always notice very sharp OnePlus 3 pictures with some dynamic range struggles. So for example, if we zoom in, the OnePlus 3 is the most sharp with the LG G5 coming in second. And that's because these phones have 16 megapixels unlike the 12 found on the 6P. However, the 6P uses a smaller megapixel count to create larger pixels that later on we will see that helps for brighter low light pictures. Now for which one is better, it's all going to come down to preference. For this picture, I'd say the Nexus 6P is my favorite. Even though I don't like how dark it is, I do love how this makes for the blue of the sky showing up along with the clouds where they're totally vanished from the others.
In this picture, all phones look really good. There's not a single thing wrong with any of them. But since this is a camera comparison, we're gonna have to nitpick. So with this picture, we do think the Nexus 6P does a much better job with the highlights. So if you look at the shutters behind Krystal's head, you have a lot more information and colors than the others. The colors are a little bit unusual though with the 6P. They're really vibrant, giving the bear a strange bluish tint. But still, I do think the Nexus 6P looks amazing here, mostly due to the great dynamic range.
Now here's a nice close-up shot of a flower. And in this shot, the 6P is the darkest, like always, which hurts the image in some regards, like you lose some details in the dark leaves behind the flower, but you also lose those details on the LG G5. And on the OnePlus 3, you can see these very well because it's the brightest photo here. But the OnePlus 3 almost seems too bright, making the colors appear a bit dull. The LG G5 looks really nice with very vibrant colors, and the 6P has really nice colors too, except they're a little different with it being so dark. But in terms of the actual flower, the 6P is able to capture more detail because it's dark enough to not overexpose the lighter parts of the flower. They're all great in their own ways, so for me, I like the colors and detail on the 6P.
In this picture, you'll see just how well the phones handle dynamic range. We have subjects that are kind of in the shadows with the background being harshly lit up by the bright sun. First thing you'll notice though is how well the blue of the sky comes through with the Nexus 6P. That's thanks to HDR Plus mode, which is only found on Nexus phones. It seems as though the Nexus 6P would rather underexpose than overexpose, but on top of that, the HDR Plus does a great job at bringing different exposed shots together. The OnePlus 3 overexposes the sidewalk pretty badly, along with the wood chips underneath the frog. The LG G5 does a pretty good job here, but since the blue sky is still struggling to come through, I'll have to pick the 6P as my favorite.
Now, I'm sure you get the idea by now that with high dynamic range pictures like this, the Nexus 6P is going to be the darkest, exposing the sky the best. But in this case, the extreme cool color shift really hurts the 6P here. Even though you don't see the sky as well on the G5 and the OnePlus 3, they have a good color temperature to them. And I think the G5 does the best in this regard, as the OnePlus 3 is still a little cool, but the OnePlus 3 does expose the sky better, and it has a bit more contrast to it, which I do like. So I'd say the OnePlus 3 is a winner here. But I think it's time to talk about the wide-angle lens on the G5. You have two rear-facing cameras with the G5, and the wide-angle lens really makes an image like this look fantastic. You have to go into landscape mode for the full effect, and even though the wide-angle lens is less quality, depending on what you're shooting, the wide-angled camera on the G5 might make it your favorite.
Here the 6P just seems way too dark, although the colors are nice. The G5 and the OnePlus 3 do a really good job at brightening the photo enough to see the main subject, but the colors are ever so slightly more vibrant with the G5. And the G5's overall image has more contrast, which makes it my favorite in this case, even if it's a little bit less natural. In this one, we have a pretty similar case with the 6P being way too dark without really any point, as the sky is almost equally poorly exposed as the others. There's just a tiny bit of blue coming through. The LG G5 is very warm here, and this time has less contrast than the OnePlus 3. The OnePlus 3 is nice and bright, has a good amount of contrast, and sits right in the middle in terms of color temperature, making it my favorite here.
Now let's talk about low light pictures, because that's where things get more interesting. All three phones do really well in low light, but the G5 always leans a little towards the warmer side and colors appear a little washed out. The OnePlus 3 is a little darker, and although its colors aren't the most vibrant, it remains very sharp. The 6P though looks really good, and this is where HDR Plus mode also shines. Now when you snap a pic, you have to wait a good 3 seconds for HDR Plus to process, but it gets rid of noise and boosts colors tremendously, making the 6P really colorful, bright, and clear. It's by far my favorite.
Here's a picture of Krystal cobbing it up, and once again, they all look really good. But the G5 is the most noisy of the three. If we zoom in, you can really see this, and you can also see just how clear the others are. The Nexus 6P has the most detail, and you can really see this if you look at the individual hairs on Krystal's eyebrows. But still, from afar, the OnePlus 3 and 6P look really good, and although the 6P is very clear, the OnePlus 3's detail is not too far off and is much brighter, making me give a slight advantage to the OnePlus 3.
So let's do an extreme low light test. The only light source was coming all the way from downstairs from a lamp in a room around the corner. And obviously this is not ideal conditions to shoot any picture, but this is what makes the 6P so special. In situations where you would normally think, oh, it's gonna be way too dark, there's no way I could take a picture here, the 6P kind of can, allowing you to get some really creative shots sometimes. Let's talk about selfies now. For front-facing cameras, these three phones do really well when it comes to detail. But if we zoom in, we can see the Nexus 6P being miles ahead, almost bringing out every little pore on my skin and a hair in my eyebrows. Now, if we zoom out and focus on dynamic range, well, the OnePlus 3 does a pretty poor job here. You can barely see the tree beyond the fence itself, and even the details on my sleeves. The G5 does a better job, and of course the 6P does the best, but that's mostly because it's really dark, once again. But is it too dark? Well, you get to see the blue in the sky, which makes for a much more colorful photo, but with it being so dark, you do lose details in the bottom of my hair. But still, I love how the 6P brings the colors of the sky into the photo and also captures a ton of detail. So I'd say the 6P is a winner here, with the G5 being a close second.
So with low light, the G5 does the best at making a bright photo, but there is a lot of artifacting going on, like around Krystal's eyes. The picture seems sharp though, where the OnePlus 3 is a little bit blurry. It's always hard to get a non-blurry selfie with the OnePlus 3. The Nexus 6P is pretty dark, but the colors are by far the nicest, and it's also the most detailed. It's hard to pick a winner with selfies because it's easy to say the one with the least amount of detail is the best because it hides blemishes, but the Nexus 6P has a crazy amount of detail, and I think it would have to take the crown here. But I really like the G5 too because the lighting looks really good.
Our last test is video, and there's going to be two things to look for. First is how well the optical image stabilization does to create smooth playback. And with the 6P, it looks pretty horrible because, well, it doesn't have optical image stabilization. The other two do an alright job. The G5 is much smoother, but has a weird jitter to it every second or so. It's a bug plaguing all G5s when it comes to video. So with that in mind, if we factor quality into this, I really like the OnePlus 3 because the G5 has a ton of contrast, too much I'd say, and also overexposes a lot. The OnePlus 3 looks the most natural here, and it's smooth enough to make it the winner. All three of these phones perform really well in daylight. The 6P exposes bright skies the best, but it leaves subjects a bit dark sometimes. And the G5, definitely the most fun camera of the three with its wide-angle lens. And then we got the OnePlus 3 that's just consistently good all around.
But when it comes to low light, the 6P definitely is the winner, I'd say. And even selfies, it's ever so slightly better than the OnePlus 3.
But these are just our opinions, so we want to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Please let us know.
And if you like this video, leave a like, and if you want to see more camera comparisons for pretty much any phone that comes out, subscribe.
Yeah, thank you very much for watching. You can follow us on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter, and we'll see you later.